Pokemon straight up just leaked some new moves and much, much more. We've got a ton to talk about for DLC and new Paradox forms. Let's dive in. All right, so I just want to remind everyone that there's a Japanese variety show, PokeDoko, which is making a new kind of special announcement this week. I believe it's January 15th, and it's said to make players enjoy the game 100 times more to celebrate the fact that we're over 1,000 Pokemon. So I covered this in a previous video, just reminding you guys that we haven't gotten any new information regarding this, but it is something to keep an eye out for this week. Don't get too excited about it, but nonetheless, it may be something of substance. Now, one of the biggest things I reported a few days ago that at the San Diego Regional Championships, they had showed some manual sprites that were shown on screen of various Pokemon like Garbodor and Kabuto and Dracovish and so on and so forth. And then they actually have something called the RK9 Labs Team Creator tool, which allows players to, I guess, submit their team sheets. It kind of shows matchups and stuff. I remember when I competed that we used that website. And in that RK9 Labs file, they actually left two moves in there that are not currently accessible in the game. Hydro Steam and Psyblade. These are selectable moves in this RK9 Labs kind of team builder, which means that they scrubbed this data from the game files, but they left it in the team builder thing, which is kind of funny, to be honest. So what are these two moves? Hydro Steam and Psyblade. You might be like, well, what does that have to do with anything? Well, we know that there's going to be two new Paradox forms being introduced through DLC. We've got this like Paradox Suicune, which is kind of like Entei, Suicune, and Raikou all kind of blended together. And then we've got this Paradox Virizion, which is kind of like Virizion, Terrakion, Cobalion, you know, kind of all melded together. So we're making this assumption that Hydro Steam is going to be coming from the Suicune Paradox form, and Psyblade is going to be coming from the other one, right? The Virizion one, which obviously makes a good amount of sense if you just kind of put the pieces together. It's not too crazy to think. But it's a little weird that we've got this move Hydro Steam coming when we've already got, you know, multiple kind of moves like that, Scald and Steam Eruption, both of which I think are exclusive now to Volcanion, which is very unique. They kind of swiped Scald from everybody and said, okay, you can have Chilling Water or whatever it's called, which was a huge nerf to water types, obviously. But nonetheless, these two new moves, Hydro Steam and Psyblade, are a-coming, and again, we do believe them to be simply related to these new Paradox forms. Now, we're going to talk about the typings of those Paradox forms, but I wanted to mention this post from PokeDoko saying there's a lot of talk going on about the DLC Paradox Legendaries. Virizion is, without a doubt, Tetsu no Aisaha. I don't know how to say that, but their breakdown is that it's a modeled plant that has white or yellow streaks and spots, so I expect that to be interpreted into the design somehow. So I thought this was kind of a cool little post. PokeDoko is a very kind of reputable translator. They're kind of breaking down the translation here, trying to kind of make some conclusions based on what this Pokemon could ultimately look like, which could be really dope. And we've seen some fan art renditions and colorations of this and what it could potentially be, but these are the two Paradox forms that we know of that are most certainly coming in the DLC, which could be announced at any day now, right? Like, I know it sounds a little wild because Scarlet and Violet was just released, but we're in this like weird period where the game just came out. They really haven't shown much about it, right? The game's out, people played it or whatever, but they really haven't given us much content around those new Pokemon. They've been pretty silent for, you know, closing in on 2 months now, and a DLC is on the horizon. And at this time in the life cycle of Sword and Shield, we actually had the DLC announcement, right? If I remember correctly, it was like January 8th of that year, 3 years ago, I guess 3 or 4 years ago now, where they announced the DLC. So again, we could be getting a DLC anytime announcement in the next 6 weeks, right? I think like now leading up to Pokemon Day, which is the end of February, that's the time frame we're looking at in terms of when this is going to be announced. So make sure you guys are stayed glued to the channel and subscribe so you don't miss out. Seriously, it takes like 2 seconds to subscribe. It's free and you just get notified when I post my videos. Maybe. Central League's posting that with these new moves, they're making some assumptions of the typings, right? Paradox Suicune potentially being water and fire, and Paradox Virizion being grass and psychic. Celebi has shuddered. Water Fire is pretty cool. Grass and Psychic also kind of, I guess, not as cool. We have their Japanese names. These are kind of assumptions, but there's also some thoughts that you've got potentially Water Electric or Fighting and Psychic. And then some people kind of took these names and like looked at them in different languages, like these different signature moves, right? Hydro Steam and Psyblade, and looked at them in different languages, and they kind of gave us some thoughts on what it could be. I guess the Spanish name refers to grass, so that's why they're kind of making the thought that Virizion could be grass and psychic. Obviously Virizion's grass in general, and that's kind of like where the head is on this Paradox Pokemon. So we'll have to wait and see how this all plays out in terms of the typings. But this is a good starting point. And one of the things that's interesting here is people have brought up this idea that this could be like the first triple type Pokemon. I don't think that's gonna happen. This could be a Delmize situation where these Pokemon have 2 types and their ability gives them kind of a 3rd type stab, much like Steelworker does. Or this could simply be a situation where it's just represented by 2 types and the move is a signature of a different type, much like kind of the Galarian birds were, where they had like, you know, freezing glare for, I think it was Galarian Articuno, and these moves were kind of like sort of related to their original typings, but not, and their typings were different. So just a couple things to kind of think about and consider when we look at this. One thing I will say on top of this is the Riddler hasn't posted anything significantly new lately, but they did make a comment saying puppy speculation is hilarious. Remember, I already told you the types of PS and PV. So Paradox Scarlet, Paradox Violet. So I guess Riddler has already told us the types of this Virizion and Suicune, and maybe we missed it, or maybe it was a riddle and we just don't know it yet, and that information is going to come to light down the road. Before I show you guys the rest of the stuff, I want to remind you we've got some great stuff available at TeamShiny.com. You guys can go to Team Shiny, pick up some sweet merch, pick out your favorite Shiny shirt, hoodies, and much, much more. You can use code STELLAR to get 15% off your order if you pick up 3 shirts or more. So don't miss out on these epic shirts, these epic designs. Deck out your closet and look awesome in Team Shiny today. Check the link in the description or go to TeamShiny.com. A couple other bits of information that I found to be interesting. Birdoren actually modified their game to show their Pikachu doing Zygarde's transformation for its 50% form into its ultimate form or whatever. So I guess there was like a bunch of like placeholder Pikachus in the game files, and it seems as though one of them was like a placeholder for Zygarde. So we've talked extensively on the channel about how Zygarde could be related, Kalos could be related, that could all tie into the DLC, and kind of this 3rd legendary, which is around the Terrestrial mechanics. So there's some pretty interesting stuff there. So just note, I mean, it's not uncommon for legendaries to be like in the game, right? They're gonna introduce them. They pretty much always introduce legendaries, but I find it interesting that Zygarde like clearly is a placeholder. And then Soul Silver says, I was chilling in my art class when Mr. Hassel randomly said this. The topic that the lesson was Terrestrial. Is there any way that Jock may have a connection to the 3rd legendary? And Hassel makes the comment, this is a bit of a tangent, but Mr. Jock's glasses are also hexagonal, aren't they? And you can see from the picture that they are indeed. You go a little further into it, and then there was kind of a thought, there was a question of what shape are snowflakes most classified as, and they call out hexagon again. The obvious thing is just that Jack was part of the professor in Clavel's team that discovered a bunch of Area Zero and Terrestrial things, but the other crazy theories about him were so much fun. Hassel cheekily hints at hexagons in the midterm exam. So the thought is they could be having some secrets here, right? There could be some secrets to Jock. There's a lot of thoughts that there could be some secrets with Geeta and kind of her story of whether she's a real person. Kind of, there's a lot of question marks about this that I think the DLC could really uncover. So generally, a lot of the times as fans, we tend to run with these ideas and they're not nearly as complicated as they ultimately like are presented to be, but it's fun to kind of speculate. And from there, we've got some really interesting posts. The last thing I'll cover today is some posts from Eclipse, who's made some comments saying, it all makes sense now. Arvin wishing to find Herba Mystica in the latest 2Y, reading a book full of BS. The 3rd legendary making them a reality once again. So the Herba Mystica. Titan Pokemon popping up again for the first time after many years, and that's why no one saw them until now. Sada or Turo wishing to live in a place full of past and future Pokemon, reading a book, a 3rd legendary making the only energy able to magically power up a time travel machine. Also, not enough staff to work on their project. They wish for more. Poof, a copy that can only live there. You see the pattern? Wishmaker on the wait. Someone, for whatever the reason, will wish for a Paradox Suicune of Virizion to be real in the DLC, and we will get them soon. The 3rd legendary is really something else. They then go on to make a post that is a Wishmaker, and we're thinking that that has some sort of a tie to the 3rd legendary. The 3rd legendary has some sort of ability to kind of make things happen is the thought here. And then the last thing I will mention, that's just some food for thought, by the way. The last thing I will mention, again, when it comes to Eclipse, we have a track record that they've definitely posted some inside stuff, but we've also seen that sometimes there's some less accurate stuff, right? So you kind of always take this with a grain of salt. But they do say that to think we missed some new Rotom forms within Scarlet and Violet cut content, indicating that there were supposed to be new Rotom forms and they got scrapped. Now, this is one that I find very interesting because I would have thought that new Rotom forms could have actually made a debut here. I think that this would have been a really good game for that. And Rotom obviously has some spotlight, being a Pokemon that you could just kind of find in the wild, which I thought was very interesting. So this idea that there could have been new Rotom forms is one that I find to be very, very interesting. And I actually posed the question today for you guys: what Rotom form would you want to see most? You can let me know in the comments section below. And that's that, ladies and gentlemen. Go to teamshiny.com, pick up some sweet merch. You can check out this video right here on the DLC and my thoughts on that and why Atlantis may actually be tied into all of this. And I hope you guys enjoyed. I'll see you guys soon for more Pokemon news.